It is my absolute pleasure to have Dr. Mara Einstein with me today because this is not only a subject that I've been really wanting to get into more and to be able to have all of our listeners really learn about, because it's something that kind of permeates our world. And it's not just learning about those people on that mountaintop wearing orange, following that guru. This is something woven into our lives. And also just because you have so much experience and you've done such a deep dive into this and are teaching it. So I just thought this is a beautiful opportunity for you to teach it to us. So thank you so much for being here.
Oh, it's my absolute pleasure. I'm so looking forward to talking about this.
Oh, good. I'm glad. Yes, I was so excited and still am. And I can't wait to see where our conversation goes. Also, as a fellow BU grad, I went to BU for undergrad, studied education, special ed, loved it. And it was interesting because I remember someone going door to door in the dorm. And then when I was in a brownstone, same. And they were trying to get students to sell Herbalife. And the person was coming across and saying that he was a student, but he looked much older, and carrying all the stuff with him and talking about how, is it hard to pay your bills here? And I was always working while I was in school too. And it was a compelling sales pitch by someone who was just trying to be very cool and relatable. And I'm where you are. Come to find out he wasn't. He's a salesperson who was trying to dress in chinos and whatever else to look like a student at the time. Very preppy school. I think it is really interesting to see how much people, even at a young age, are being influenced in these ways without knowing what to watch out for. And I really wish this were curriculum in schools, in even elementary schools. And I tell people, and I've said it on the podcast, that I've used trigonometry never, but if I instead could have had a class about how to notice if someone is trying to snow you, or if you read a study, to first look to see who published it or who paid for it, and just sort of understand what you're getting drawn into, I think it would really set people in a much better and safer road in their lives in so many ways. So I really am so happy that you're teaching this, not just here, but in so many different places.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's interesting because two things came to mind when you talked about BU. And I thought for sure you were going to say Scientology, because that's one of the stories that I talk about in the book, is that when I started at BU and I was walking down Boylston Street, and some guy, again, looking very preppy, right? So very sort of innocuous and unthreatening, came up and asked me and a friend of mine if we'd answer a couple of questions. And he had a clipboard. So the obvious thing you think is, oh, he has a questionnaire on the clipboard. Let me respond to that. And then he starts walking down the street. And we're stupid enough to be 17, 18-year-old college kids. We followed him down the street right into the Church of Scientology. So he asked me how old I was, and I was 17 because my birthday was in November, so I hadn't turned 18 yet.
Same.
And he told me I couldn't answer the questions, and he took my friend into the other room. Well, I've been interested in cults since I'm like 13 years old, and I had just read Ted Patrick's book, Let Our Children Go. Right. And so I was sitting in the waiting room of the Church of Scientology, and I picked up the pamphlets that they had on the table, and I see the pictures of the e-meters, and I went, holy, I know exactly where we are. I knocked on the door, I grabbed my friend, I looked at the dude, I said, we gotta go. And then I pulled her outside and explained to her where we were. But if I hadn't read that stuff beforehand, that I wouldn't have known where we were, and I would have thought that she was totally fine getting involved with us. But to the point of how cults indoctrinate people or recruit them, the first thing they look for is vulnerable people. And one of the most vulnerable groups are college students, freshman college students, or any student who's just starting on the campus, because they don't have social system yet. You haven't met people yet. You're looking for a place to fit in. And look, at 17 or 18, you may think you're all together and cocky, but you're not quite as together as you might think you are, and you're looking for your place to fit in. And so these groups know, Stephen Hassan talks about how he was recruited at Queens College, which is where I teach, in the 70s. And it's actually funny. There's a number of cult experts who got indoctrinated at Queens College. I'm not really sure what that's all about, but maybe a full circle thing going on here. It is college students who are incredibly vulnerable, but not just.
Right. Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think that's why, yes, exactly as you're saying, that not only multi-level marketing, but cults will do their recruiting in and around college campuses. It was bold of them to be on the campus of BU because I think it really isn't a campus. Then, you're in the city. Usually in private colleges, they're kind of right outside the doors, but public colleges, there's really nothing you can do to stop them, as I've seen. And I remember getting there. I had already been learning about cults also in high school and was very interested and intrigued. And I had heard about all these front names that cults use on college campuses. And then I went to the student union at BU, and there they were, the tables that said Alpha Omega. And I knew that that was not a sorority or fraternity. I knew that was a front for a Bible-based cult.
And they're still around trying to recruit my students. Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And so I knew that was part of the ICC, the Boston movement, as it was called then, the International Church of Christ. And the Churches of Christ are fine, but if it starts with the name of the city that it's in, like the Los Angeles Church of Christ, New York Church of Christ, Boston Church of Christ, it is part of this other cultic group. And they have all these front names. And I remember going to Dean Thornburg, I don't know if that was his name, of Marsh Chapel on campus. And I just said, there's a problem here. He said, oh, I know. I have been trying. I've been working. I've been seeing. I said, is there something I can do? He said, who are you? I introduced myself. And he said, actually, there are a bunch of kids leaving on a bus outside one of the dorms now to go away for one of their weekends. And I said, I don't know if I can do anything. I never liked confrontation, but I thought maybe I can do education. So I remember talking to kids, I'm calling them kids, but I was the same age, saying, you're getting on a bus. Do you know where you're going? Oh, yeah, we're going on a weekend. I said, no, that wasn't where you're going. That's what you're going for. But where are you going? Oh, we're going with them. They didn't know where they were going. They were being taken on some weekend in the mountains, I guess. And I said, what happens if you need to leave early? Oh, I don't know. I'm not, it's fine. It's fine. Like they're all just like sheep, right? Just going, filing onto a bus. And it was alarming to see that, knowing also that when people got involved in this group, they would very often have to leave school because they couldn't keep up with their commitment to God in this group and school. So they were like, as they were stepping onto the bus, I felt like they were stepping away from their lives, There wasn't a lot I could do to stop the momentum. They were very excited, and they were already singing on the bus, and they were getting them really into it. It was disturbing.
Well, it is that love bombing, that acceptance, that surrounding people with not just the love, but this idea that they are going to have some kind of impact on the world, or that they're given some kind of a philosophy that allows them to understand their place in the world. And certainly, I'm not sure when you went to school. I went to school in the late 70s and early 80s. And so we weren't baby boomers, though technically I think they call us baby boomers. People call us now Gen Jones, because we didn't interact with the Vietnam War, but we did deal with kind of the fallout of all that stuff. And we were around with the time of Charles Manson, so we knew that sort of stuff was going on. So we were kind of aware of all of this stuff, but we were also in this place of thinking we wanted to make the world better. That part of the baby boom, that part of that generation, I think still got instilled in us that grew up in the 1970s. And so we were looking for groups, not religious groups, because this is what's really important in all of this. All of these places where traditionally people had looked for personal identifiers, right? So what family you grew up in, what job you had, what church you belonged to, all of those things were means for you to be able to create your identity. And a lot of that got blown up in the 1960s, right? Because all of a sudden everybody was saying, no, you don't have to go to the church that you grew up in particular, or the synagogue or the mosque. You could try something else. And so there was this whole explosion in trying different faith systems. Well, what got mixed up in a bunch of those faith systems were a bunch of cults. And so we were trying to find ways to make the world a better place. And unfortunately, some of those groups that were telling us that that's what they were going to do were actually planning to do something else.
Right. Oh, absolutely right. And it's so interesting to talk about identity, community, connection. But I think it's interesting that when I ask people this question that they get asked a lot, which is unfortunate, people in abusive relationships get asked this question, and putting the emphasis on the wrong person, they get asked, why did they stay? And there's so many, right? Really? That's such low-hanging fruit, like just blame the victim. But there is an interesting answer for a lot of people when they say the connections, the community, the belonging. I could see that the things I was promised were not coming true. I could disagree with the leader, the philosophy or the theology no longer made sense. It seemed abusive, et cetera, et cetera. But I had given up everything and everyone for this. Right. And I don't want to leave this too. And it is really compelling.
Right. Well, that's what, to go back to the MLM conversation where we started this whole thing, is that's what happens to people in MLMs. What I learned, I spent 3 years studying MLMs. Multi-level marketing, for people who don't know, are, for lack of a better term, legalized pyramid schemes. And so what happens when people get pulled into Herbalife or doTERRA or Monat or any of the thousands of other ones of these groups is they automatically get this put into a community. Now, different from when we were growing up, what happens is they quickly get put into a group chat. It might just be on their phones or through a social media space or whatever it is. And so immediately people are saying, oh, you're going to be so great at this. We know you're going to be able to do this. And of course they're going to say that because they want them to become part of the downline that's going to be their source of income over time, which is okay, fine. And then what happens over time, just as you say, people find that they're spending more and more and more time with other people in the multi-level marketing space to the point where they've given up all of the other people around them. So when they get to the point where they want to leave, it becomes really hard because they're filled with so much shame, because they've told everyone else, no, this isn't an MLM. And this is what they've been saying, some of them for years. And so when they finally get to the point where they say, oh my gosh, I actually have been in an MLM, and the amount of guilt and shame around that is so difficult to then be able to go back to the people who you've asked to spend so much money with you and who you said, no, you don't know what you're talking about, and go back to them and say, no, I was wrong. And I talk about this a lot in terms of now MAGA, because I know it's really hard for people to say, no, they voted for all of these things that I disagree with. And I do too. Do not get me wrong here. I disagree with everything that they voted for. But from everything that we know about either people who have been in cults or people who have been in MLMs, which are commercial cults, because that's what they are, is that the only way for people to be able to get out of these groups is to know they have someplace to go. And if they don't have any place to go, then they stay. Right. And so I'm not saying, come, I'll give you dinner, but to let them know that they are not fundamentally forever in a place where nobody will accept them. That's certainly something that I would love people to think about. Because it's this idea of meeting people face to face. There's a wonderful book called The Wrong Way Home. I don't know if you've ever talked about this on the podcast, but it's written by a psychologist, and it was written in the early 1990s. And he looks at a particular couple that were pulled into a cult. So this is pre-social media, pre-internet, all of that. But what he talks about is the way to break over this is to walk in the other person's shoes. And to think, where would I have to be in my life to end up in the position where these people ended up. You don't have to agree with everything, but to be able to begin to think to yourself, what was going on in this person's life for them to end up being pulled into this? Maybe they had just gone through a divorce. Maybe they just started school or moved to a new town or whatever it was. They found a group that would accept them. And if we think about MAGA in particular, what Steve Bannon and all of those folks knew is they looked at the work of Robert Putnam and his book, Bowling Alone, and understood that there was a growing epidemic of loneliness in our society. And what they did was say, okay, where can we find all of these lonely people? And the group that they targeted more than anything else was disaffected baby boomers. Because there was a very large group of baby boomers. Because look at the age. If you look at, I don't mean to be smiling, but it's kind of crazy. If you look at the people who showed up at MAGA rallies, look at the age of them. They're definitively baby boomers.
Yeah.
And so they were the folks who felt like they didn't get what all those other baby boomers got. They didn't get the education. They didn't end up with the jobs, right? And all of the things that they had seen their parents have, the house and the two-car garage and being able to go on vacation, and their kids were able to go to college, and they didn't get any of that. And it's like, where was mine? And suddenly here was a person, a cult leader, who said, I can take care of all your problems. Because remember, what the cult does is provide an overriding worldview that will answer all your questions. Really important.
So
does that make sense?
Right. Absolutely makes sense. And it's interesting about the answers because I've been doing this kind of counseling, having this podcast, running a bunch of support groups. There are 3, a 4th in the works for former Scientologists. And so many people talk about the loss of having the answer. What's so interesting is I think we have, because there's so many losses. That's why I tell parents or the spouse or or the children of people who have gotten out, like, as soon as they get home, don't throw them a party. They are grieving. They're having, like, wait on the balloons because they're still landing and they don't know what happened. And they've lost the community, the path, the sense of meaning, but also having ready answers. And when you have these ready answers, it's so calming for some.
Right,
I mean, probably for us, we would go, that was too fast that you had the answer. But but I think for other people, and I understand this because when we're children, we love that our parents have the answer. We don't then question if it's right. We're just so happy to have one that I think that's part of the issue here.
This is great that you give that example because in the book, The Wrong Way Home, what he talks about is us wanting to be kids riding in the back of the car. We want someone in the front to take the lead. And I'm not a psychologist, and I'm very particular about this. My training is as a marketer and to a certain extent a sociologist. I have an MBA and a PhD in media, so I'm very conscious of not stepping into areas where I am not an expert. So I won't do that. But I can make certain comments about what I see based on research that I've seen. And I would say for a lot of the younger generation that they've had their parents tell them the idea of helicopter parenting was really not helpful for having kids learn how to fly. COVID, and certainly don't blame that on anybody, but COVID also just led to a generation of kids who didn't have the chance to socialize in high school or elementary school or college in the same way that other people did. And I see this in my college students now, still trying to figure out how do I develop these relationships with people. And then from that, how do I grow to be an adult? Because this pushing off of being an adult, I think, also makes people more vulnerable. And that I do know, whether you're talking about marketing or you're talking about cults, what people who are trying to sell something are looking for are people who are vulnerable. So if you're talking about cults, again, it goes back to what we're talking about in terms of college students. College students are vulnerable, but also people who have gone through some breakup or have some other kind of life-changing experience, you're vulnerable. What marketers look for is people who are vulnerable so they can sell you a product. And this has existed since the beginning of advertising.
Yeah.
And so you're too fat. You don't know how you put your makeup on. Your skin isn't the way it's supposed to be. You aren't tall enough. You aren't, whatever it is.
Right.
But all of those things are done to make you feel bad about who you are, so you will buy into what it is that they're selling.
Wow, it's incredible. And I want to get into more from your book and the idea of brand religions. Those kinds of terms are just like, they're like delicious. I remember when I was doing this work early on, when I went on to grad school and became a therapist, but I had always wanted to do this. And I found even when I went to USC for grad school, there was something I've talked about on the podcast is I had a class as part of my master's program that was to learn how to do group therapy. And sometimes our classes teach us how to do it, and sometimes they teach us how to not do it because it was run like a cult. And the more you shared, the more you got into your trauma, the more you were liked, the more the teacher would kind of pat the chair next to her, like, come sit next to me. And the people who were not sharing their trauma were withholding. It could be that they didn't have trauma or they didn't experience what they went through as trauma, and that's okay. But there was a hierarchy, and people went out for coffee who had shared more. They all went together. It was very interesting to see all that, even within a class of how to run groups. And so I use it as this test, like if anything is happening that feels at all like my class, I go, I'm doing this wrong. And I'm putting my needs in this, and that can't be. And that's a very interesting idea. And I remember also then hearing at one of these original Cult Awareness Network conferences, which is now part of Scientology. Scientology sued the Cult Awareness Network, right? But originally it was this great organization years ago. It was in the late 80s, and then when I first got involved. And Robert Cialdini came to speak about persuasion and influence. And then so I read that book and then Persuasion. And he said, if you want to learn about what happens in a cult, just watch the Home Shopping Network. And it was fascinating.
Wow.
Because he said you can.
Oh my God, he's so right.
Right. You can
I never
get this.
thought about that, but he's right.
Right. You can get this bracelet. Look at this beautiful person who's wearing this bracelet, and it's a special deal right now. And there are only 12 left. Right, scarcity. And we see how special you are out there wanting this reciprocity. They see how special I am. What do I give back to them? And there are only 12 left, and order before midnight, and all of the rush, because with cults you have to sign up right away. It was so fascinating. And then I thought, there's been so much that's happened since then in terms of algorithms, like you talk about in the book, that I'd always wanted for this all to be updated. And here it is. Thank you. Thank you, Mara. That's fantastic.
I knew you needed this.
You heard me.
Knew that.
That was fantastic that you heard that.
Why don't you do this? So you were talking about, you've been looking at this for 30 years. I've been looking at the intersection of marketing and religion for 30 years. Wow. And so, it started many years ago. I wrote a book called Brands of Faith, when I talked about religion as a product that is sold, and that sort of opened up the whole topic as of conversation. But what I've discovered over time, and what was interesting to me and why I got to writing this book, was that, one, it's sort of the culmination of 30 years worth of research, but it is also how digital technology changed how we think about the definition of what cults are. And so in the 17th century and pre-17th century, cults were a group of people, a sect, that revered a person or an ideology, specifically a religious one. By the 19th century, that was expanded to include non-religious groups or ideas. And then the idea of what a cult was changed completely in the late 20th century because of Manson and Waco and Jonestown and all of that. And it wasn't until the early 20th century that starts to change because of the digital space. And so what happens is in the early 2000s, you have these things that brand communities, right? And these are groups of people who start to coalesce around brands. And a lot of that was done by the marketers, but not solely by the marketers. One of the examples that I like to give is Nutella, because people who love Nutella. And there was something created called World Nutella Day. And that was created by fans of the product. It wasn't created by the company. And so people would create Facebook pages just for Nutella and share their recipes and all of that kind of stuff. Okay, so by 2005, those brand communities have then morphed into what are now known as brand cults. And back then, there were just a handful of them. Apple, Harley Davidson, Oprah, maybe, right? But now you have a whole swath of brand cults because people are looking for these identifiers, and the commercial space, the companies came in to fill that void created by the lack of having a faith or a family or a job that are identifiers. It's like, if I tell my students that people work for the same company for 30 or 40 years, that's just beyond their understanding that anyone would do that. But if we look at the cult recruitment and retention process, right, they look for vulnerable people. That we've already talked about. The second part is they lure people with deception. Come take a questionnaire with me, and the next thing you know, you're pulled into the Church of Scientology. Then they try to upsell. They try to get you to engage more with the group. And I had researched the Kabbalah Center as part of the work for Brands of Faith. And one of the things they do at the Kabbalah Center is you take a class, and part of the first entry-level class that you take, you get a private session with the teacher. Well, that private session is a session to get you to buy a whole bunch of stuff. And it's a very hard pressure sales stuff that they're doing. And you're one-on-one in a room with the teacher. And remember, you're vulnerable to begin with. You've joined this group because you are looking for a belief system. And then you're in this space one-on-one with the teacher. Right. You're in the most vulnerable place you could possibly be, and they're trying to upsell you. Then you get the love bombing, right? You're wonderful. We know you're going to be great, all of that. Tough love. Kabbalah Center is another great example again, but there's so many. If you really cared about this, if you think that this is really important in your life, you will find a way to pay for it, right? And we see that in MLMs all the time, all the time. You will find a way to pay for this stuff. Then you get the deprivation, right? Not sleeping, not eating, all of that kind of stuff. Then you renounce anybody who would question, right? If you don't believe in this, we've got to get rid of you. Then they tell you who they really are. But by that point, you've gotten rid of everybody else in your life. You've been fully immersed in the indoctrination. And then the last part is, if you try to leave, they make it really hard, right? So they become very litigious, Scientology, follow people around, all of that sort of stuff. Now, anybody who's done anything in terms of marketing may be hearing something known as the marketing funnel, because that's exactly what this retention and recruitment process is. When we talk about it from a marketing perspective, we have this funnel, and there's different ones that have more multiple levels in it. The most basic one is you have awareness at the top. So you have a funnel. So it's very big, open on the top. You're trying to get as many people as possible to be aware of what it is that you're selling. Then the next step in the process is, once you've sort of gotten people's attention, then you want to become part of their consideration set. So you start bombarding them with more information, maybe free samples, whatever it is. Then the next step in the process is conversion. I love that it's called conversion. When you buy the product, you're converting. And the last step in the process is loyalty. But that last step, we now call those people marketing evangelists. Because the expectation, because of digital technology, is that those people will go out and tell everybody else how wonderful we are.
Oh, wow. That's incredible. Marketing evangelists. What a term. Wow. Wow. Yeah, I remember, the Kabbalah Learning Center has been an interesting place. So just for people to be reminded that Kabbalah is this thousands of year old tradition of mysticism, Jewish mysticism, but the Kabbalah Learning Center, started by Rabbi Berg, It was his playground, unfortunately, for his ego. And I remember checking out their free introductory classes just to see what happened and how many techniques of control were used. And I remember something very trippy that I learned there, and I thought, this is so interesting about dependency. They said that everything, and you may have heard this too, I don't know how often they mentioned this, but it's during this free introductory class. All the information you take in through your senses cannot be trusted. It's not real. It's not right. I mean, have you ever been persuaded to think something different about someone just by looking at them? Yes, we all have. Okay, so that means you cannot trust your sight. And you can't trust this. You can't trust. The only thing you can trust are things that are invisible, like the things that are from God and the things that are spiritual. And the only way you can see them is through us.
Oh, what they did in that one-on-one sales thing with the teacher is they tried to sell you the Zohar, right? And the Zohar is all in Aramaic. And so you don't have to learn Aramaic. All you have to do is run your finger over the letters, and supposedly the energy from those letters are then going to come to you, and you will get the wisdom of what is in those books. Well, the other person now who uses the same thing is Vishen Lakhiani, who is the guy behind Mind Valley. And so one of the things that's really interesting on my blog, on my website, and the post that gets more attention than any other is the one about Mind Valley. People are really fascinated by this. Mind Valley is a really interesting example. They have some legitimate teachers. For anyone who doesn't know, Mind Valley is an online platform that offers all sorts of classes, and it's everything from spiritual classes to weight loss classes to how to be a coach. You know, coaches coaching coaches. That's a whole nother conversation we could have. But what it was started by this guy, Vishen Lakhiani, who many kind of compare to a young Deepak Chopra, who used to be the marketer for the Maharishi, right?
TM.
Right, TM,
Yeah.
thank you. So what happens when you look at Mind Valley and the people who sort of promote it, try to find anything negative about this company. It's almost impossible to do, because what happens is there's all kinds of videos on YouTube, and people will say, this is a true review of Mind Valley. And they started out saying, you know, oh, I really reviewed these classes, and then it pivots to say, oh, but it was really wonderful. This was really fabulous. And when you look into the notes underneath the video, almost all of them have an affiliate link to sell classes as part of Mind Valley. Oh. And what they do that is also incredibly interesting, which is something that the Mormon Church has done. The Mormon Church is so good at search engine optimization, or SEO, which is when you get your information at the top of the Google search, is if something comes out that they don't want anybody to know, they just pump out tons of content so it gets pushed down. That's the same thing that Mind Valley does. They have so much content being pushed out by so many people, you can't find anything bad about this organization.
Wow. Wow, incredible. It's, oh, okay, I'm going to definitely look into this, because, my goodness. And, you know, Deepak Chopra has a whole, well, there are a lot of issues.
Yeah.
Right. But.
Also connected to WeWork, by the way.
To WeWork?
WeWork. I had a student who ended up working for WeWork because the company he worked for got bought by WeWork. And the people who run WeWork were very tied into actually the Kabbalah Center, were members of the Kabbalah Center. And so they were trying to create this whole sort of commune based on the idea of a kibbutz in Israel. And they would bring in speakers. And of course, Deepak Chopra was somebody that they would bring in to talk to the group. And
Yeah. Someone just let me know that they bought his tuning fork that is tuned to the frequency of love. So
awesome.
You buy awesome. I love that response. Great. And so you buy this thing, $30, $40, whatever it is, and you play it, hit it, and it is supposed to make you feel love. And then, you know, we create a feeling in us when we want something to be true. I mean, it is sort of a perfect marketing tool, unfortunately. Yeah, I want to talk about your whole marketing background, but there's a lot to talk about. I just think it is so interesting as we're weaving now, and people can see very clearly how much this dovetails into, the work that people do in big business, trying to get ahead, being influencers, and buying into different ideas, different companies, becoming coaches, as you're saying, which is hugely problematic. In fact, there's an MLM that the product that they sell is becoming a coach. So it's like, like a cultic thing within a cultic thing with a, it's like
Right,
this cultic
right, right.
soup or like whatever, double
It's
decker
like Russian
sandwich.
dolls,
Right,
like
right.
the Russian dolls,
Oh,
right?
that's perfect.
Yeah,
Yes, perfect.
yeah.
Um,
Well, that's what Mind
yeah.
Valley does. It's really
Oh,
funny. When they tell you that the problem isn't a problem, you know it's a problem, right? Because one of the videos that they put out is you'll hear that there are too many coaches around. Let me tell you, there aren't too many coaches. No, there aren't too
oh,
many
yes, there
coaches.
are.
Most of them don't know what they're talking about. But
Yeah.
it's interesting when you were asking about my marketing background, and not so much to get into that, but it was interesting because I did interview marketers for different aspects of this. And because of my background, they're more willing to talk to me because they understand that I've been in the trenches and I know what the kind of work that they have to do. But I didn't tell them what the subtitle of the book is. I didn't tell them the title of the book at all. And when it was done, after I would finish an interview, I would say the title of the book is Hoodwinked: How Marketers Use the Same Tactics as Cults. And I got two responses. One was like, yep, that's what we do. And the other response was, yeah, that is what we do. It's interesting as I talk about this more in more places, more people who are in the marketing space are feeling like some have either left because of they felt like they were doing something that didn't align with who they were and their ethics, and others are finding ways to get out. But let me also say, this can be used for good too. It doesn't have to be used in a negative way. In the same way, cults don't all end like Jonestown, and the
Right.
vast majority of them do not. This idea of, how to create community for people, that's a good thing. If it happens around, I mean, it could happen around a nonprofit organization. It could happen around a brand, depending upon what the brand is. I mean, look at Ben and Jerry's. The whole idea of their activism, and I've talked about purpose marketing and purpose washing for a long time. And I'm sorry to say that Ben & Jerry's remains one of the few examples of a company that knows how to do this right, because they have immersed this into who they are. They talk about Black Lives Matter. They were online talking about the insurrection like the day that it happened. They are committed to democracy. One of the founders was just arrested at the Senate because he was there protesting what was going on. And so this can be used for good. And so I don't want to just say, oh, this is a bad thing overall. A lot of
Right.
it's bad, but it doesn't have to be.
Right. It's so interesting because then you get down to the nitty gritty here, which I think a lot of people will say, listen, I got involved in something and it turned out to not be so bad, but then I got involved in something else, turned out to be horrific. And usually it's about intention. Um, what is the leader or the director's intention or the CEO's intention? And with Ben and Jerry's, I think that they had this intention to be able to have this balance, it sounds like, to be able to not compromise the quality of their product, but also their souls, their
Right,
conscience, and to
right.
be able to do both, which is, yeah, you're right. It's not often that you see that.
And it's not an easy thing to do. But another example that I've given is Lush, which does the
Oh, the
soaps
soaps.
and bath bombs and all of those kinds of things.
Yeah.
And one of the things that they did is after Frances Haugen, who was the whistleblower against Meta, came out and talked about how bad Instagram was for teenage girls. Lush knew that that was a large part of their consumer base, of the demo that buys their products. And they pulled everything off Instagram. They are no longer on Instagram and haven't gone back. And
Wow.
on their page, it's just said, go somewhere else.
Oh,
I
wow.
mean, that's a brand committed to the people who are buying their products. And that's the kind of purpose washing you want to see. But
Mm-hmm.
if we're talking about one of the things that I created for the book is the cult marketing continuum.
Yes.
And so it starts with brand cults. It goes to influencers that I call cult light, because not every influencer is bad. There's some that are trying to do good in the world. Influencers who become conspiracy theorists, not so great. And then multi-level marketers. And so when I talk to cult experts and to MLMers or ex-MLMers, and I said, if you had to create a Venn diagram of a cult and an MLM, what would it look like? And they all said a circle, meaning that a cult and
Yeah.
an MLM are the same thing, right?
Right.
So
Mm-hmm.
along this continuum, right, you have increasing amounts of extremity in terms of being more cult-like, and you have more anxiety. And one of the key ideas that I'm talking about in the book is that it's not that we're living in an attention economy. It is that we are living in an anxiety economy. Because what the technology is trying to do isn't just trying to get your attention. And remember, all of this is in the service of selling more advertising, which is all in service of getting you to buy more stuff that you don't need. It's one thing to get our attention. Okay, great, you have our attention. It's not that. It's to get us to be so anxious that we stay engaged with the technology. And so if you look at the technology itself, there is no endpoint, right? You finish reading a book, you close the book, you're done. You finish watching a movie, you're done. There is no endpoint when you're on social media, and it is designed that way so that you will keep scrolling and scrolling and scrolling and scrolling, starting to most often increase your anxiety, because the two things we know get people to stay engaged is rage and awe. And more likely, what's happening now is rage, particularly from influencers, because influencers know the more that you engage people emotionally, the more they will stay engaged with you. The more they stay engaged with you, the more money they will make. And so it becomes this unending cycle of creating anxiety. And the more anxious that you are, right, the more vulnerable you become, because you start thinking from this emotional space.
Right.
And this also ties in terms of the technology of what Daniel Kahneman, economist, talked about, which is thinking fast and slow. So the technology is created to get us to think fast or think emotionally rather than think slow, which means that you would actually think about the information while you're looking at it. I mean, think about it. When was the last time somebody posted something and you were like, oh my God, that's really horrible. And then you sat back 2 seconds later and went, yeah, that doesn't sound right. I mean, I saw it yesterday. Okay, I'm a Yankees fan. This may turn people off right away, but I am a Yankees fan. And there was a video of Aaron Judge talking about how Aaron Boone should be fired and how some pitcher came out of the bullpen and he didn't even know who he was because they're just having. And I was like, Aaron Judge would never say that. Like, and I was like, what the heck? And it was a 3-minute video. But it was only because I know him and the organization and all of that, that it wasn't him. And it was, in fact, this incredibly well done deep fake.
Wow.
And we're going to see more and more of that. And so we have to bring our judgment to this content now, probably more than ever. The other thing is just to tell people to completely disengage, I know is not an answer. And I'm as guilty of it as anybody else. But if you can find times not to have your phone, and certainly now, particularly with what's going on with the United States government, Palantir, Peter Thiel, you know, put your phone away if you can. Lock it in a drawer for a while. If people need to reach you, they'll reach you. I mean, I know. I was a single mom for 10 years, so I get it. If you're a single mom, you need the phone, you need to have somebody be able to reach you. I understand that. But not everybody is in that situation. And if you don't need your phone nearby, don't have it.
That's really incredible. Right. Yes, as a single mom too. I remember also having these kinds of discussions with my kids about when they should have a phone because I might need to reach them, and a working mom, right? I mean, we have a lot in common. I remember, you know, there are a lot of people who I talk to who follow Tony Robbins. And, right. You and I could never play poker, and we have immediate reactions to I love it. But yes, so, he says to say yes. You have to say yes to everything and the power of now. And I gave a talk at the National Association of Social Workers where I said it was called The Power of No. Like, no, just say no or later.
Yeah.
Look at things first. Find out, take a moment to think. Don't sign up yet. Do your research. Talk to people
Right.
who have gotten involved. See how it affected
Right.
them. Slow things down and really see how you feel when you're not in that system where they're creating those emotions that you're talking about and you
Right.
are then home. Do you still feel the same way? Are you still as charged up?
Yes.
It's
Yeah.
a really important thing. So your reaction
Yeah.
to Tony Robbins, I find
Oh,
interesting. Yeah, go ahead.
well, watch the movie, the documentary about him, which was talked about as being balanced. I don't even remember the name of the documentary. I don't want to. But there was one scene in the documentary where he's talking to this woman who had been a member of the family of God, right? And I had just recently read Daniela's book, Uncultured. And so I knew that in that cult, they talk about the people who have abused them as uncle. Okay, so let's put that aside for just 1 second. So he does what he always does, which is, stand his very tall height over someone, towering over them, and talks to this woman and is supposedly making her feel, having some kind of major breakthrough and crying about having been abused, having been part of this cult, and so on. And then there's two guys nearby, and he says, okay, these two people are going to be your uncles.
Oh, no.
And I thought my brain was going to explode, seriously. And so I did a TikTok about this, and somebody from his organization came after me and said, oh, it was a much longer thing. No, it
All right.
wasn't 15 minutes and all of this kind of stuff. I said, I realize that. But he just said to somebody who's been a victim of sexual abuse that she called her abuser's uncle, and he's telling her that she's going to be connected to these two guys, and they are now going to be her uncles. Did he know that? Did he even think about that? For him to be doing that kind of nonsense, it is simply unforgivable. I could go on. Don't get me started on Dr.
Okay.
Phil, because
Oh, God. No, right?
I could go on.
There are some shows, talk about like Ben and Jerry's. There are some shows I'm asked to be on, and it would be great for exposure. Somewhere deep inside, I have to say no. Dr.
Right.
Phil has asked twice, and each time I've said no, even though part of me says maybe I'll go on and talk about how he shouldn't be doing what he's doing, and he shouldn't be sending
Right.
people to these teen treatment places, and he shouldn't be doing a lot of things. But I also didn't want to seem aligned with him in some way. I didn't want to sell my soul. But
Right.
it's shameful. It's beyond irresponsible. It's really endangerment, I
Right.
think, in so
Right.
many
Yeah.
ways. But yeah,
Right.
so that's a whole other show we could get into.
That's a whole
Hours.
whole other show. But thank you for being so integrous, because people like that are few and far between.
It's hard. It's hard, especially if you're first getting started and et cetera. Yeah, no, it's a hard decision sometimes. I would love to get into, your work and the impact guild. I mean, all of it that you're doing that is so important. And also just for people who are listening, because there's so much that you're doing that I want people to know about. We're going to be putting a lot of links in the show notes, so people will get this information about where to find you and your book and all of it. When we get into this kind of marketing that's cult-like, people often want to know what to watch out for. What are these, the red flags? There's some green flags, but the red flags, or whatever term is now used for that, because sometimes it's called different things. But
Right.
what should people be having their antenna up for?
Right. Some of the stuff you've already talked about, certainly if anybody is trying to get you to do something really quickly and not letting you think about buying something, there's nothing that you need now. There's nothing you need this very second. The scarcity marketing is a big thing, right? And we'll see this certainly. Come on, do we really think that Microsoft couldn't have enough Xboxes available at Christmas time? Of course they do. They're trying to create this need to buy it now. Prime Day, don't even get me started. Prime Day, Black Friday, all of that stuff is bogus because usually it could be a couple of months or 6 months before the product was on sale for less. They bump up the price right before so that they can say that they've taken the price down. Going back to the shopping network, right? The shopping network never gives you a price and that's only the price. It's the price and then they knock the price down, right? Basic kind of selling tools. The increased use of sensory marketing, this is the big thing now, is that, either you're buying online from influencers, and we'll go back and talk about influencers if we have time for that in a minute. Yeah. If you're buying in the real space, the marketers will do certain things in order to get you to connect with the product right away. They know if you touch something in a store that you are more likely to buy it. So if you go into a store and someone's trying to get you to, feel the blanket, feel the material of this shirt or whatever it is, that's because they're trying to get you to buy. The sense of smell, which is one of our most powerful senses, is used in order to be able to get us to buy. Different stores will use different scents. You can think of the scent of a new car. If you go to Disney World, they have different scents that they project out into the park in different places where you are because they know it's going to get you to buy and spend more money. So this goes all along the way. When you use a MasterCard credit card, there's actually a sound that comes up when you use the credit card also to get you to align with the product. So every sense that you can think of is being used in order to be able to get you to buy. Think the next time you go into a store. Also, when you go into a store, they now have scripts. So that I remember walking into a store down in Soho in New York. I happened to be going to a meeting, and so I walked into a store just to kill a little time. And I heard the manager saying, "Oh, are we asking people where they're from this week?" Right? So they are, right? So they're figuring out how do we connect with people as soon as they come into the door so that then we can get them to engage with us, and then they will feel like guilty if they don't buy, right? They work on that kind of stuff. From an influencer standpoint, if you're looking at doing this online, there's something called the persuasion knowledge theory, which works sort of like a three-legged stool. So that, do you know the person who is selling you the product? Do you know anything about the product or the product category? And do you know whether or not the person is being paid to sell you that product? So if one of those things is unknown, you're going to rely on the other two. So that you may be watching an influencer, and maybe it's an influencer that you watch on YouTube and they talk all the time about makeup. Come get ready with me, right? Those kinds of videos. But you don't know whether or not they are getting paid because they're usually a little slippery about their sponsorships. But you will trust them more because you have bought into following them, right? You haven't, unlike a commercial where it's communication that's being pushed out to you, you haven't asked for it to be part of your entertainment experience. When you engage with an influencer, you have opted in to watching their content. And so when they say, "Oh, this bronzer is the best thing in the world," you're more likely to accept it until and unless they've actually put the hashtag ad or hashtag sponsor in the bottom. And a lot of them don't. Or if they do it badly so you don't know. And so it puts you in a down position in order to be able to protect yourself against whether or not they're selling you something.
Incredible. Incredible. And have there been studies, there probably have been studies, on the brain waves, the impact that it has on people who are watching certain content or who are attracted to the people trying to sell it or whatever else? I mean, I think there's so much about that interplay too, if you're turned on or turned off or whatever else. And I think so many people now don't realize also that when someone is doing a video, they don't look like that really necessarily, or that was like their 200th take to get it perfect. And so it's not a real thing, really.
And a lot of them have a whole team behind them, right? Forget the filters, so the slicker ones have a whole team behind them to get them to look like that. The other thing to be aware of, particularly now as we're going to start moving into election season, is that people who are promoting for a candidate don't have to say that they're being paid. They don't have to, because it is covered by the Federal Election Commission. It's not covered by the Federal Trade Commission. So they don't care. The FEC doesn't care. They don't look at this stuff at all. And so if you have an influencer that you follow and all of a sudden they start saying how much they like a particular candidate, I would just think more than once or twice or even 3 times about whether or not that person is getting paid to say what they're saying.
Incredible. Oh my goodness. I didn't know that that could be hidden. And
Yeah.
that
Yeah.
is frightening, actually. That's really frightening.
Mm-hmm. And there were a number of people who were called out about it.
Okay.
Yeah. But
Interesting.
a lot of people don't know that.
Huh. I'm wondering about, and I want to go back to examples of this rage and awe, because it is, I think people get very caught up when something is fear-based, as you were talking about, and people get very riled up and they get really angry, and they also have these moments that give them goosebumps, and they want that to be repeated if at all possible, because who doesn't? So what are some examples that you've seen, that you've come across, that really dig into and try to trigger these emotions?
Trying to think of what. I mean, there's so much lately about. Oh, here's a good example: the floods in Texas, and somebody posted a story about how 2 girls were found in a tree that was 27 feet high or whatever it was. Well, it turns out the story was false. But that was shared so many times before it ever happened. Now, it turns out the original story was from a newspaper. This is part of the reason why people don't trust journalists anymore. Traditionally in journalism, you have to have 3 sources before you ever put any kind of content out. Why this newspaper did it, I don't know. Somebody then posted about this story about 2 young girls being found. It was not true. That was could be rage or awe.
Yeah.
Certainly, all of the things that are going on with the federal government right now is causing a lot of rage with people. This is a little lighter note version that I write about in the book is Lashgate. There was this influencer who had a deal with L'Oreal or whatever it was, but she put the sponsorship so quickly on the bottom that people didn't see it. And people said that she was using false eyelashes instead of actually using the mascara product that she said she was. This became a whole kerfluffle, right? Ultimately didn't hurt her views at all in terms of that. But this sense of outrage that somebody would lie to us about how they're putting their makeup on creates this sort of silly kind of kerfluffle. Somebody that does a really good job actually and gets into rage, but does it in kind of a subtle way, and I actually like how he does it. There's this guy by the name of Misha. I don't know his exact but it's something like "don't mess with a gay guy" or something like that. But he's a wonderful storyteller. That's what makes for a good influencer, whether they're using information for good or bad. And now you often hear on TikTok people start the video by saying, it's story time. Part of the reason for that is, right, this whole storytelling is what's really good. Now, Misha happens to be one of the good guys. I would put him in the cult light version. So a lot of people follow him, but he tells really great stories. But he also creates rage in people because he talks about injustices that happen in the world. So this is why I talk about how you can use this for good and for bad. He's a gay man who is very open to engaging with his followers. But if they go over the line or if they mistreat people, he then also spins it to use it for good. I can give you the name of who he is because I think he's a good example of doing this for good. I can't think of some other current rage thing. I'm sure people have I'm sure people
Oh,
have
I am
examples.
sure. Yes, I'm sure. I
Yeah.
think that there is so much just that people are able, I mean, it's good to notice when you're starting to feel something big, whatever it is, whether it's rage or awe or anything. And to wonder what did that, and was it a combination of things? Were many of your senses kind of connected to? Were other kinds of things ignited in you, and how? And I think also people do get increasingly angry now, seeing how much they've been drawn in by something false, by something AI generated, by caring about someone and they find out that someone is into someone, that's a very hard thing for people now, I think. And what I hope that doesn't happen from that is that people pull back, kind of stop caring because they don't know if anything is true anymore and if people are really in
Right.
danger in these ways
Right.
or if they really need to donate to this cause or not.
Right. Well, that's actually a great example right now is, MAGA sort of imploding over the fact that the Epstein list is not being released. All of a sudden, I don't trust them anymore. And the reason why is they think the list is full of Democrats, not because they think Donald Trump is on that list. And so you're seeing online sort of video after video of these people. There was one the other day of Alex Jones crying because this list is not being released. Or there's videos of people taking all of their Trump paraphernalia and throwing it into the garbage can because they feel like they have been betrayed. Now, there's this sense of, do I trust that these people are really leaving? Because they bought into everything else up until now. Why is it this thing that is breaking the camel's back? Why is this thing breaking the bookshelf, right? Mm-hmm. And, I think it has to do, the first thing I thought of was Pizzagate 2.0, right? Because the whole point with Pizzagate was that it was all about pedophiles. All they talk about all the time is pedophiles, protecting all the kids from pedophiles. And so Epstein being a pedophile, if you're not releasing the list, then you're not releasing the list of pedophiles. Well, their cult leader is on the list of pedophiles. Mm-hmm. And that's why the list isn't coming up. That's not what they think. They think it's full of Democrats. And so they're claiming that Trump has now become part of the so-called deep state.
Incredible. It is really, go ahead.
That's what's creating all this rage and awe on both sides of the aisle. On one side, you have all of these, MAGA folks angry and really angry about the fact that this list is not released. And on the other hand, you have all of the people on the left who said, well, the heck with you people, FAFO.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, right. And what's interesting too, because you were in that whole world of marketing, there is a language around it in it. And I know some of it is pretty tepid and you just have to kind of get introduced to it and people get used to saying certain things. It's not part of my world. If I'm going over an idea for something with someone and they say, well, let me have a think and I'll circle back. I'm like, you're definitely big business. I can hear it.
Just to quickly go over my background, I started my career as an actress. I have an MBA from Northwestern. When I left school, I worked in advertising. I worked on Dole Foods. I was the only woman working on Miller Lite, so that's kind of battle training in that area. I worked on Colombian Coffee. I worked on Atari International, so that was a while ago. Then I worked in marketing at MTV Networks. I was the director of advertising and affiliate marketing for VH1. And then I worked at NBC in marketing. So I've been on both sides. I've been both the client and on the advertising side. And so, having done all this and what moved me from not wanting to do that anymore was, one, I felt that getting people to watch more television at that time wasn't my best use of my energy on the planet. Mm-hmm. And I was also, as a marketer, you see all kinds of research and I was seeing more research saying that people were unhappy. And so that's not where I wanted to be. I decided I wanted to study it instead and criticize it. And that's what my career has been for the last 25 years. But what I also know from having been in that space is that the terminology that's used in marketing is very militaristic. So when we talk about marketing, we talk about strategy, objectives, tactics, target, right? All of those things are military terms. So we're thinking about, what is our objective? How much are we trying to sell? When are we trying to sell it? Who are we trying to sell it to? All of that is the strategy. What do we know about those people? And because of all of the digital information that is available right now, we can target it down to, whether or not you like cats or dogs. What time of the day will you open your email? Do you possibly have Parkinson's because of the way that your mouse is moving when you're playing on your computer? Like, all of that is very, very specified now. And then the tactics that we're going to use to get to you. Are we going to use social media? Are we going to use a combination of social media and online streaming? And who is our target? Who are we specifically targeting to? So that's why when my last book was called Black Ops Advertising. That's why I called it Black Ops Advertising, because when we think about the military now, it's all hidden. And so that book was all about all of the ways that we're being marketed to that we don't know that we're being marketed to. So this book, Hoodwinked, is an extension of that, combined with what we know in terms of what people's sociological needs are in terms of community and being able to find ways to connect.
Oh my goodness. It is so powerful. And now I'm going to be hearing those terms in a different way, even just target. Who are we targeting? And wow, that's incredible, right? It's like you're the prey.
Right. In my writings, as little as possible, and even conversations, I talk about people as consumers as little as possible. I talk about us as people. We're not consumers. Consumers suggest we are people that use something up. It also allows somebody else to define who we are. And if we constantly think about ourselves as consumers, we're not thinking about ourselves as citizens or anything else that we might want to use as a label for ourselves.
Right. It's true.
Right?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I agree. And I think it is true. You don't want to have people decide what you are, also in a way that feels insulting and that feels like easily manipulated. Right. I would love to, of course, offer you the chance to talk about things if you feel like you haven't talked about them yet, but I would love for you to talk about the Impact Guild too, because I think things like that are important for people to know about.
The Impact Guild is an organization that brings people together who work in and around the media space in order to be able to do good in the world. And so we don't come to the Impact Guild as parts of our organization. We come to the Impact Guild as individuals. So there are people who belong to the Guild who work for MTV Networks and Disney and the Kaiser Family Foundation and all, you name it, the MacArthur Foundation, the Ford Foundation, whatever. Very large groups, but we're not there as members of our organization. We're there as individuals. And how can we learn from each other in the spaces where we work to be able to use our platforms to make the world a better place? And if anybody in the audience is working in that space, if you go to, I think it's impact-guild.org, you can find out more about us.
Thank you for highlighting that, because when I talk to a lot of clients and they will say, with all that's happening in the world and all that's been happening in the world for a long time, but still all that's happening now, it's hard to find good news. And it's hard to be able to, as Mr. Rogers used to say, find the helpers, look for the helpers. Right. And it's important. I think it's really important for people to know that people are doing good things, because that's harder to come by when you look at the news,
Yeah. The ultimate optimist, while I think we probably have a lot more bad to go through for a little while, I do think that there are things, because look, when I give presentations, or if you write a book, and I'm sure you've gone through this too, you write a book, the publisher always says, but what can people do, right? They always want the last chapter about what it is that people can do. One of the things actually that gives me a lot of hope, and I hope I can say this on the podcast, is there's this theory of enshittification, which was created by Cory Doctorow. And the idea of enshittification is this process that every social media platform goes through, which is it starts by having people creating this wonderful content. Then people come to follow the content, and it's this wonderful space that everybody loves spending time in. And then the advertisers come, and then it all starts to fall apart. And we've certainly seen this most recently with TikTok, because as the shopping space became more expansive, as the advertising became more expansive, you just don't want to spend as much time on there as they did before. And now with Oracle taking it over, nobody should be on there at all. But this happens in all these spaces. And so what's happened is social media has been around for 10 years. And yes, it has its place, but I think it's going to get to a point where it takes up less time in our lives because people will find smaller groups of people where they have real connections. So we're already finding that people are going to Discord channels. People are playing D&D on Discord channels, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that is going to be the trend because you'll go on social media, but I don't think people will spend the kind of time in that space that they have been before because of exactly what we're talking about. This increased use of deep fakes, this increased use of information that we don't really know where it's coming from, and people will begin to trust other sources in order to be able to find the information that they need.
It's really beautiful. And D&D, it's interesting you should mention it. It is such a creative space. Dungeons and Dragons, if people don't know what that's about. We're finishing up, and I hate to have to finish up because I feel like there's so much more we could talk about. Is there something else you want to make sure to mention before we stop for today?
Yeah, this is actually another positive thing, is the anti-MLM movement has been incredibly successful in helping to, if not bring down that industry, which certainly hasn't happened, starting to see the walls, be not quite as strong as they were before. And what we're seeing is a number of even really large MLMs starting to either fold or change their selling structure. And for Hoodwinked, I interviewed corporate marketers from multi-level marketing companies. And they didn't go on the record, but I did talk to them. And it was really interesting. When I looked for people who worked for these companies, they either went to Harvard Business School or they went to Kellogg Northwestern, which is where I went. And the way I was able to get to them was through the Alumni Association. Because I had been one of them, they would talk to me.
Interesting.
And, right? Mm-hmm. So they wouldn't go on the record, but they said that they knew that there were problems coming in the industry. They knew the Direct Selling Association, which is their lobbying group, was losing millions and millions of members. They knew that people were finding other ways to make money, particularly with things like Amazon affiliate links. And so a lot of them are changing their sales structure to be an affiliate sales structure, or Modere just folded. It had been bought by private equity. Not that I would ever usually say anything good about private equity, but if it makes an MLM company fold, I'm all for it. And so that one just went bankrupt because of having been bought by private equity. And so what the anti-MLM movement did was create a tremendous amount of content, kind of like what Scientology did, but also content that sort of looked like MLM content, but sort of pivots in the middle. The YouTube algorithm thought it was MLM content and was feeding it to people who were in MLMs. And so a lot of people who are in MLMs, and you'll hear them even post their own videos saying this, that they saw a tremendous amount of anti-MLM content, which then led them to figure out that there was too much cognitive dissonance, so that they then ultimately left the MLM they were involved in. And so I think what that group of people have done, and it's not an organization, it's just a bunch of people who've decided that this is what they're going to do. I think that that's a great case study for us to look at, to understand how to get people out of things like MAGA, things like other cults, ex-people, if they're willing to talk about it, to use the language of the cult so that people start watching the video and then pivot to explain why they left and how they got out and that they're okay. But I'm not telling anybody to do that unless they're comfortable doing it. The folks in MLM, and not all of them are, but there's an increasing number of people. Julie Anderson, if you haven't seen her work, is wonderful. Roberta Blevins, her work is all over the place. Exit MLM is another one. There's a lot of folks out there doing a lot of really good work.
Yeah, there have been some people who have been in MLMs here on the show. Roberta Blevins has been on. Thank you for that reminder. People check out her episode. Thank you so much for also ending on this lovely positive note of things potentially changing and people becoming educated and aware, and also a message being generalized. Like, let's take this and see how we can weave it into other realms and how it fits. And if this is also a way to teach and protect people and have people kind of come to, because I think people get into a trance-like state in so many of these groups. But thank you so much for teaching us more about the marketing funnel, the recruitment, retention, engagement, how it all kind of works. I know there's always a lot more to talk about, but I love the depth of your experience and multiple experiences. And your students are lucky to have you teaching them. And it was a total pleasure to talk to you today. Thank you so much.
Thank you. This was really terrific. And please, if anybody wants to reach out to me, please come to my website. There's a way for you to contact me. And my work is all about providing people agency in this space, in the consumer culture that we live in. I want you to feel like you have agency, that you are not just a cog in the wheel.
Yeah. Oh, so important. So important, and all too easy to feel. So thank you so much.
Yeah.
Great to talk to you today. Hope to talk to you again.
Yeah. For
Okay.
sure. Thanks so much.
Oh, yeah. Thank you.